The deep dive. Ready to dig into a story that's, well, a little bit messy.
You could say that.
We're talking love, betrayal, the whole drama roller coaster. But with a twist, ancient history style.
And a prophet. Don't forget the prophet.
Right. We're diving into the story of Hosea from the Hebrew Bible and his interesting marriage to Gomer. So, to set the scene, expert speaker, what was going on back then?
Picture ancient Israel, but not the idyllic version. Idolatry was everywhere, even among the Israelites. Like, imagine a society where people are supposed to be devoted to their faith, but they're anything but.
Okay, so not exactly a time of peace and harmony. Got it.
Far from it. It was a time of spiritual decay, a stark contrast to everything they were supposed to be. And it's into this chaos that Hosea, our prophet, steps in.
With a message for everyone, I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. A message that was about to get very, shall we say, personal.
That's what I'm here for. Now, I've got to be honest, this whole story threw me for a loop at first. Hosea is commanded to marry a prostitute.
You're catching on. And yeah, that's not an exaggeration.
That's not exactly a typical marriage, even today, let alone back then.
Not even close. We're talking ancient Israel, where social and religious rules were everything. Prostitution wasn't just frowned upon, it was a huge offense, like a direct violation of their covenant with God.
So, to recap, we've got a society obsessed with following the rules, and then, bam, Hosea is told to break one of the biggest ones.
You got it, and not just break it, but live it. This wasn't just a personal order, it was a huge symbolic act.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. But before we get into that, can we make sure everyone listening knows we're looking at this from a historical and cultural angle?
Absolutely, that's key. We're leaving theological interpretations aside today and focusing on how this all would have played out in that time and place.
Perfect. Now, back to that symbolism. We've got Israel straying from their faith, and then there's Gomer, who, through her profession, embodies that straying in a very in-your-face kind of way, right?
Right on. Hosea's personal life, this very public act of marrying Gomer, becomes a mirror reflecting the spiritual state of a whole nation.
And her actions, well, let's just say her fidelity track record, that becomes a metaphor for how Israel's treating God.
Exactly. It's not just a marriage on a human scale. It's about this broken covenant playing out on a personal, very public stage. Talk about high stakes.
No kidding. But this wasn't some hidden affair, was it?
Not at all. Gomer was known, and that's putting it mildly. Her actions, her unfaithfulness, everyone knew.
Just like everyone knew about the Israelites and their less than stellar behavior toward their faith.
Precisely. It was all out in the open.
So he didn't just marry someone whose actions were public knowledge, making his own choice even more radical. It's like he was choosing to take on that societal judgment right alongside her.
Wow. It was a bold move, no question. And his willingness to do that, to embrace what everyone else rejected, that says a lot about his faith, even in the face of everything.
Yeah.
And it's not just that he goes through with it, it's how he does it. The text makes a point of saying how immediately Hosea obeys, like no hesitation.
Just, okay, got it. This is happening.
Exactly. It's like he knew right from the start that this wasn't about him. It was way bigger than him, bigger than his reputation.
Bigger than both of them, really. It was about reflecting something massive.
Exactly. And to have that kind of obedience, that unwavering commitment, especially when everyone's probably telling him he's crazy.
Or worse. I mean, you got to remember, this is ancient Israel. Tradition and religious law, that's everything.
It really was. Their entire lives revolved around it.
So marrying a prostitute, that's not just breaking a rule, it's like shattering the entire game board.
Oh, for sure. He would have been absolutely ostracized, judged, maybe even considered like ritually impure by some.
Wow. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one side, it's God himself saying, do this. But on the other, it's his entire community ready to cast him out.
It's huge. And yet, he doesn't back down. He lives it. And for me, that's where the story goes beyond just history. It's about love and forgiveness, like pushed to their absolute limit. Even when there's betrayal, it's still there.
It's like he was living proof of the message he was supposed to preach.
Right.
Choosing this radical love over what society expected of him.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another layer of this whole thing. Remember, Gomer's actions weren't exactly a secret. Everyone knew, and still, Hosea chose her.
So it's not just about the act of marrying a prostitute. It's knowing what he was getting into, knowing everyone knew, and still saying yes.
And doing it publicly.
It's like he was saying to Gomer, and maybe to everyone else too, I see you, your past and all, and I choose you.
Powerful, right. And it creates this amazing parallel. Because just like everyone knew about Gomer, God knew about the Israelites, their actions. Not a secret.
Their unfaithfulness, everything, it was all right there in front of God.
In plain sight, just like Gomer. And Hosea, by taking her back, by loving her despite it all.
He was holding up a mirror, showing the Israelites the consequences of their own actions without having to say a word.
Just such a strong image. And it shows how powerful this story is as a metaphor, right?
Absolutely.
Hosea chooses to forgive, to love without conditions, and it reflects God's love for his people in this really beautiful but heartbreaking way.
Okay, so we're seeing how this very personal struggle for Hosea, this marriage, it becomes this huge reflection of what's going on with the whole nation.
A whole society's relationship with their faith.
Their unfaithfulness, the heartbreak it causes, but also this incredible love that just keeps on going, even when it's tough.
It makes you think, though, why go through all of that?
That's a good question. Why not just, preach a really powerful sermon about repentance? Get straight to the point.
Why make it so, well, complicated?
I think it's the power of action, of something actually happening instead of just being talked about. Right. It's one thing to hear someone talk about something.
Yeah.
But when you live it.
There's no comparison. It changes you.
So Hosea took those big ideas, the betrayal, forgiveness, and made them real, tangible. You couldn't ignore it.
He was living it every single day. And let's not forget, this wasn't some performance. This was his life, his actual marriage.
He was feeling all of it, the pain, the frustration, the joy, every bit of it, just like he was showing the Israelites what God felt.
Exactly. And that makes it so much more powerful than words could ever be, It really makes you think about, like, what kind of pressure he must have been under, to do something that radical, that countercultural.
It's huge, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you think about those moments we all have where it's like, do I go with what's easy, what everyone expects, or
do you listen to that other voice? The one that's calling you to something more.
Even when it's hard, even when it's like sticking out like a sore thumb.
Especially then, I think. Hosea's story is a great example of that. It's about saying yes, even when it's messy, when it doesn't make sense to anyone else.
Because it's about something bigger than just us.
Exactly. And sometimes that bigger thing, it leads us down some pretty unexpected paths.
Paths that might even seem scandalous to those who, well, maybe you haven't heard that, call themselves.
But often those are the paths where the real growth happens,
Where love gets real, where faith is tested, and where, honestly, we find out who we really are.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Hosea and Gomer, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to walk away with?
What's that nugget of wisdom they can carry with them?
For me, it's this. You are seen, you are known, flaws and all, and you are still chosen.
Just like Hosea chose Gomer.
Exactly. And even more than that, just like God chooses us every single day.
That's a powerful thought to end on. The idea that this love, this messy, wild, unconditional love, it's bigger than any of us.
Bigger than any rule book, that's for sure.
And it has the power to change everything. Well, that's been the deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through history, faith, and some seriously unconventional love. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.